Yeah. So, I get to complain a little bit when Rabbi Green is away, because I know he complains a little bit when I'm away. So I'll complain a little bit that it's easier for me to express myself through music than it is sometimes through words. But it is my privilege to be able to speak to you when he is not here. So this week's Torah portion, Pinchas, is one that speaks of leadership and some of the qualifications of a leader, and also tells us a story of some women who stood up for something that they needed in a society in a moment that wouldn't have recognized what they needed. And so there's some good stories in this week's Torah portion, Pinchas. So this idea that Moshe knows that he's not going to reach the promised land, he's not going to be, he's going to see it, but he's not going to enter it. He's going to die before that. And he is concerned about who will take leadership after him. And he hopes and wonders, can it be one of my children? And God says, no, this is not a hereditary position. This is an earned position by someone's character. You know, Moses was chosen with all his faults for his humility and kind of saying, I can't really do this. That was one of the reasons he was chosen. And we're all chosen to do something, whether it's leadership officially or not, we're all chosen. And we certainly all sometimes say, can't do that. But there we are. So there's a leader, there's a priest named Pinchas, and Pinchas is a bit of a zealot. Pinchas, in his righteous anger, acts in an extreme way. And Moses is very concerned that will be the next leader, this kind of zealot and someone who can't necessarily hold his righteous anger and therefore is too harsh to judge and too quick to hurt other people. And so Moses then understands and learns that it will be Joshua, one of the only surviving people who have escaped from slavery and wandered in the desert and lives to then go into the promised land, because most people do not, because that generation needed to die out in order for the Jewish people to know how to be free. And Moses gives leadership to Joshua. Moses lays hands on Joshua and gives him leadership in a way that we often in the Reform movement do for new rabbis and for new leaders. And he is thrilled that it's Joshua, and we learn that and we study that we're happy that it's Joshua, because Joshua is a leader who can temper his feelings, but also can really represent diverse people. He's seen as a leader who can really listen and also see you for what you can give, and see you for what you can give, and not just say there's one right way to be. And so he's able to take the risks of leadership and to know how to listen. And so this Torah portion asks us it demands of us that we ask, what do we stand for? What am I a leader in? How am I a leader? Am I a leader who listens to different people and diverse opinions? Am I a leader who is quick to anger, quick to judgment? It asks us to know kind of what are we willing to stake our leadership on? What do we stand for as a leader, and also what we fight for? And in this story that also is in this Torah portion, connected to this idea, are the daughters of Zelophehad. And Zelophehad, these daughters are 4 young women who stand before Moses and ultimately before God and say, there are no men to inherit, and we should inherit what our family has passed down. We should count. And ultimately God agrees. So it's this really standing up and becoming a leader kind of in a way that we may not always recognize that we are. And God, the phrase that God affirms, the plea of Try and say it 5 times fast. It doesn't even work one time. The plea of Zelophehad's daughters is just. And so this asks us to look at our time today. How are we being leaders? How are we standing up for what we believe in? And how are we listening to those that are coming before us and saying, hey, listen to me. Listen to what I have to say too. And they go together. And many of you were not here, but at Shabbat morning services a couple weeks ago, our director of youth engagement, Bryant Henselman, spoke. He is a Jew by choice and a Jew of color, and is part of this national cohort of Jews of color that are speaking about some of the issues that Reform Judaism needs to look at in terms of these issues. And he spoke so eloquently about literally his tears that fall on his Torah when he's studying Torah at home for the voices that are not heard, for the difficult things that we read. We read things in the Torah that we don't agree with. It's not all good, it's not all easy stuff in there. It shouldn't be. And he spoke that he used to wipe away his tears, and now he lets his tears fall on his Torah because it reminds all of us that we have to work through what's difficult and listen to every voice, listen to all the diverse voices. And so his story and my story and your story and the story of these daughters of Zelophehad are reminding us, are we listening? Are we hearing everybody's story and not just the predominant paradigm? And I was reading a commentary by Rabbi Shira Koch Epstein, and she broke down this example of the daughters of Zelophehad, what example they give us. She broke it down into 4 parts and asked us to look at today. Are we listening before we act? Are we thinking of these 4 ideas so that we can make a change in the world? Because we all know that changes need to happen. So she broke it down into these 4 things. One is, again, she's speaking of these 4 daughters in the Torah. One is they take a risk in coming forward publicly. Now, I want to acknowledge that it is not always safe or possible for us, if we have something we need to tell or do or change, it is not always safe or possible for us to come forward publicly. So with that knowledge, she says that they take a risk in coming forward publicly, and that they are risking everything by being in the public square and speaking out and sharing their narrative, and that they're speaking to a society that they won't necessarily listen, but they do it anyway, and they take so many risks in standing up anyway. Number 2, she says they stand together and do not present competing claims. So according to this midrash about it, these 5 sisters are successful because they were 5 and did not send one of them to represent the rest. Rather, all of them were wise and could represent their claim. And so how do we ensure that our claims for justice do not become competing claims that contradict each other and deny the claims of another? So how can my story uphold my sister's story, uphold my brother's story? How can our stories not compete, but raise us all up? Number 3, she says, as partners, the daughters find a way to share the same message with each individual leader and then influence the whole political body. So they step forward together in the square, but then they divide up, and one of them goes to speak with Moses, one speaks with Eleazar, one speaks with the chiefs, and they told their stories one-on-one and individually until it was appropriate that they would come before all of them to represent themselves. So there's this divide and conquer going toward the same goal. And so Rabbi Epstein asks, how do we serve as allies and use our access to bring important messages to those in power in ways that leaders can hear? How do we create allies and then build allegiances? And number 4, she says, they make a pragmatic demand that is immediately actionable. They make a pragmatic demand that is immediately actionable. So while, of course, there is so much work to be done in our world now, and so much work left after they spoke up in their world, they didn't let that stop them from taking a small step. So as she says, while these daughters of Zelophehad left us with considerable work to do to create equality and equity in our society and in the Jewish people, they made a specific policy request that was granted and immediately created change for them and set precedent for all future generations. And so, with those thoughts, she asks, when seeking change, how do we connect demands for complete justice with demands for practical, implementable, if sometimes imperfect policy changes that have real life impact? As we stand up before God, may we know for whom and for what we stand, and learn from these lessons of our risk-taking, justice-seeking ancestors. Kini Hiratzon, may it be.